Walmart, the giant once untouchable in American retail, is closing stores again. Workers push to relocate, customers walking out with frustration instead of bargains. And shelves that once promised everyday low prices now scream broken trust. But here's the shocker. While Walmart stumbles, global attention and money are tilting toward Africa. Yes, the very continent America's boardrooms used to dismiss as emerging. Today, it's not Africa chasing Walmart. It's Walmart scrambling to stay relevant. And the reversal cuts deep. Families in the U.S. who once relied on Walmart for survival now feel trapped inside a system that no longer respects them. Meanwhile, Africa is offering something Walmart cannot mass produce: dignity, traceability, and a sense of meaning behind every purchase. The twist? This isn't just about retail, it's about a shift of power. A shift from America's corporate empire to Africa's rising marketplaces and youth-driven innovation. Before we continue, let me ask you something personal. Where are you watching from? Are you in the US, dealing with Walmart every week? Are you in Africa, building new habits and platforms? Or in Europe, seeing both sides of this divide? Comment below with your own experience, because your story is part of this global shift. This is Africa Daily Good News. We bring you sharp analysis, global headlines, and untold stories shaping Africa's future, and America's too. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because this channel is where news meets perspective. Now, let's step into the bigger picture. Let's pull back the curtain on how Walmart's aura shattered, and why the world's shoppers are quietly turning their eyes and their wallets toward Africa. Imagine walking into the biggest store in America and feeling like you've been robbed before you even reach the checkout. That's the paradox inside Walmart today. A place that once symbolized savings now feels like daylight theft packaged in blue vests. Families expecting everyday low prices are staring at shelves where costs climb faster than paychecks and the quality slips with every purchase. For decades, this giant dictated what groceries should cost, what clothes Americans wore, and even how communities survived. Now, the empire looks less like a provider and more like a system draining trust drop by drop. The irony is striking. There was a time when Walmart didn't just compete, it defined the rules of retail. Need groceries? Walmart. A cheap TV? Walmart. Even medicine or financial services? The answer was always the same, but the invincibility has cracked, and the collapse isn't engineered by regulators or Wall Street. It's coming from below, from ordinary shoppers who've stopped believing. And once belief is gone, even the largest empire begins to rot. Here's where the twist sharpens. It's not only that Americans are walking away from Walmart. It's that their money is flowing somewhere else, toward Africa. A continent once dismissed as developing is quietly absorbing the loyalty Walmart thought was permanent. Every transaction lost in Arkansas becomes an investment gained in Lagos or Nairobi. And the more this shift accelerates, the clearer it becomes that America's retail crown is slipping. Take a simple observation. Most American families once planned their weekends around a Walmart trip. It was routine, almost cultural, but habits evolve. According to surveys on consumer trust, younger Americans now say they'd rather buy from platforms that reflect their values, even if it means paying slightly more. That's a huge reversal, because for decades the logic was cheapest price wins. Today, dignity, traceability, and authenticity carry weight. And Walmart, built on sameness, cannot deliver that. Think of it this way: people want to feel their dollars mean something. A young mother in Ohio recently told reporters she left Walmart after buying the same brand of kids' clothes 3 times in a row, only to see them rip within weeks. Her frustration pushed her to try an online African marketplace. What she found wasn't just fabric that lasted, it was a story. Who made it? Where it came from? Why it mattered. That single purchase reshaped her loyalty more than a decade of slogans ever could. Maybe that's the deeper truth. Human beings, if given choice, will always move towards systems that respect them. Most Americans don't consciously wake up saying, "I want to abandon Walmart." But little by little, disappointment becomes exhaustion, and exhaustion turns into revolt. Once the spell breaks, it doesn't come back. And as Africa builds new options, those cracks in trust widen into exits. The pattern is familiar in history. When giants stop listening, smaller voices rise. Right now, the world's shoppers are voting with their wallets, and the votes are leaving Walmart behind. But this is only the surface. Because behind every lost receipt in the US lies a deeper story. How Africa is positioning itself, not as a follower, but as the new center of global commerce. And that's where the real shock begins. Here's the unsettling reality. Millions of transactions that once seemed guaranteed to flow through Walmart's registers are no longer there. It's not a minor dip or a seasonal slowdown. It's a quiet exodus, a slow bleeding of loyalty. And the surprise isn't just that people are spending less, it's that they're deliberately spending elsewhere, reshaping the map of global retail without waiting for permission. For years, the assumption in America was simple. Walmart was the default. When people thought shopping, the reflex answer was Walmart. But habits are fragile. Once broken, they don't return. According to retail analysts, the decline isn't a trickle. It's measurable billions slipping away. And here's the twist. Much of that money is bypassing other American stores entirely, finding its way to African e-commerce platforms, local production hubs, and export-driven startups. The logic sounds almost upside down. Why would US dollars escape into Africa of all places? Yet that's exactly what is happening. Investors who once parked their money safely in Bentonville, Arkansas, are now wiring capital into Lagos, Nairobi, or Kigali. Consumers who once accepted the sameness of Walmart aisles are experimenting with platforms that feel fresh, personal, and human. It raises an uncomfortable question. If people have alternatives that give them value and meaning, why would they return to a system that treated them like statistics? Think about human behavior. Most Americans, if they can, choose comfort over disruption. Yet surveys show that once a person feels consistently cheated, higher prices, worse quality, empty promises, they don't just change stores, they change systems. The transition might start with curiosity, like trying an African marketplace online, but curiosity quickly becomes habit. And as any behavioral economist will tell you, once a habit shifts, it rarely shifts back. Consider the story of a young couple in Texas who once spent every Saturday morning in Walmart. They switched one purchase, a set of ethically sourced coffee beans ordered from Ethiopia. At first, it was novelty. But after tasting the difference, reading the farmer's profile, and realizing their money had a traceable impact, they admitted they couldn't go back to the faceless rows of bulk coffee cans. That single change spiraled into others: clothing, crafts, digital services. What began as an experiment became a lifestyle. And here lies the mini twist. It isn't just Africa winning customers. It's Walmart losing the very trust that made its empire possible. The more America's largest retailer insists it's strong, pointing to revenues and store counts, the more disconnected it looks from the reality of shoppers quietly migrating elsewhere. Dominance today isn't measured by how many stores you build. It's measured by how many customers you keep. So when the world's biggest retailer bleeds customers at home while African platforms gain them abroad, the story is no longer about a company. It's about a global shift in confidence. And as this confidence tilts, the mood doesn't stay contained. It spills into the broader question of who sets the rules of commerce in the years ahead. That question will only grow louder because the next chapter isn't just about spending habits. It's about how entire generations are choosing who they trust with their future. Here's the paradox no one in Bentonville wants to say out loud. The continent, once written off as too poor, too unstable, too fragmented, is now where the money is flowing. Africa, long treated as a passive consumer market, is suddenly the place US investors, global retailers, and even disillusioned American shoppers are turning their eyes. That flip in perception is historic, and it's leaving Walmart in the awkward position of watching the very dollars it thought were permanent migrate into systems it never believed would work. The data backs it. Reports tracking retail flows confirm that African e-commerce platforms and local production hubs are absorbing global capital at Walmart's expense. A decade ago, Western economists would have laughed at the idea. Today, the laughter has stopped. Instead, the question is how fast the shift is happening and who benefits first. The irony is thick. America's largest retailer built its empire on the assumption that Africa would always be on the receiving end of cheap imports. Now, African companies are exporting not only goods but models of innovation that American consumers find more attractive. Think of the human side. Most Americans grew up seeing Africa through headlines of instability or poverty. But behavior changes once people experience alternatives firsthand. The average US shopper might discover a Nigerian fintech app that processes payments smoother than Walmart's clunky self-checkouts, or a Ghanaian cocoa brand that tells a richer story than the faceless chocolate bars in Walmart aisles. Once that experience happens, it's hard to forget. And as psychologists often note, once trust forms around a new habit, people don't simply go back, they double down. Here's a subtle twist within the twist. It isn't only American dollars fueling Africa's retail rise. It's African youth themselves, building platforms that directly solve problems Walmart never could. In Lagos, in Nairobi, in Kigali, startups are linking farmers to buyers, designers to global customers, and logistics networks to households that once felt unreachable. What the West assumed was impossible is now daily reality. And the more local solutions prove effective, the more they attract outside attention, creating a feedback loop. Walmart cannot enter. Take the story of a college student in Atlanta who ordered handmade jewelry from Kenya through a digital platform. For her, it wasn't about price. It was about connection. She could see the artisan, the origin, the journey. When asked later if she missed the convenience of Walmart, she answered bluntly, "Convenience without meaning feels empty." That one line captures why Africa's rise matters. It's not just about commerce, it's about dignity. And here's a gentle nudge for you watching. When you think about your own shopping habits, do you lean toward price or do you lean toward meaning? Most people never stop to ask that question. But once they do, the answer reshapes more than where they spend money. It reshapes who they trust. This is why Africa's role cannot be dismissed as symbolic. It's financial, it's cultural, and it's personal. Each lost sale in an American superstore becomes another gain in Africa's orbit. And as this tide builds, the image of Africa as follower collapses. The continent is no longer waiting for an invitation to the table, it's building the table itself. So when we watch Walmart stumble and Africa accelerate, we're not just seeing different shopping choices. We're watching a generational pivot in who defines the future of consumer power. And that realization sets the stage for a much larger question. If Africa is rising by rewriting the rules, what happens when American trust finally reaches a breaking point? Step into an average Walmart today and the contradiction hits immediately. The brand that once promised affordability now feels like a trap. Prices inch upward month after month. Fabrics wear thin after just a few washes, and machines designed to make checkout faster often stall and frustrate. What was meant to be convenience now feels like punishment. This is where trust erodes, not in dramatic moments, but in the small daily disappointments that pile up until consumers quietly decide they've had enough. And here's the subtle twist. When people feel cheated, they don't simply switch brands, they switch belief systems. Decades of consumer psychology show that trust, once broken, is rarely restored. Think about it. Most Americans are creatures of habit. They'll return to the same store, the same aisle, the same brand, if it makes life easier. But if that habit begins to feel like exploitation, the same human instinct drives them in the opposite direction. Suddenly, the store that was once routine becomes a symbol of everything they want to escape. Compare this to what's unfolding across African marketplaces. Instead of endless aisles of sameness, consumers are presented with goods tied to a story, hand-woven baskets with traceable origins, cocoa or coffee that reveals the farmer's name, fashion items created by identifiable designers. The purchase isn't faceless, it's personal, and in an age where so many people feel reduced to barcodes in a system, that human connection becomes priceless. Take the example of a middle-aged father in Michigan who shared online how he stopped buying school supplies from Walmart after discovering a Kenyan platform selling handcrafted notebooks. At first, it sounded inconvenient, longer shipping times, unfamiliar payment methods. Yet what pulled him in wasn't the notebook itself. It was the story printed inside the cover, explaining how the purchase funded education for local children. He admitted later that even if Walmart could undercut the price, it couldn't undercut the meaning. That one purchase reframed what value actually meant for his family. And this is the contradiction that Walmart cannot resolve. Scale was once its weapon. The bigger the store, the lower the price, the greater the loyalty. But scale without trust is meaningless. Shoppers today want to know that their money carries weight beyond the register. If they sense indifference or manipulation, they'll find alternatives, no matter how far away. The irony is sharp. Technology that once gave Walmart dominance is now giving consumers the freedom to bypass it entirely. The mood is shifting from frustration to discovery. People who once left Walmart feeling cheated now leave African platforms feeling seen. That emotional difference is the silent driver behind this global retail realignment. And as more Americans join this quiet revolt, it sets the stage for a deeper question. What happens when a younger generation, raised entirely on these new choices, never sees Walmart as a default at all? 70% of Africa's 1.3 billion people are under the age of 30, a statistic that reads like a demographic fact but feels more like a revolution waiting to happen. While America and Europe wrestle with aging populations and shrinking risk appetites, Africa's youth are rewriting the rules of commerce with restless ambition. And here's the twist. They never inherited Walmart's brick-and-mortar mindset. They skipped the old system entirely and went straight to digital. This is why cities like Lagos, Nairobi, and Kigali don't just host startups, they host ecosystems. Young coders are building apps that link cocoa farmers directly with international buyers, fashion designers with global customers, and small manufacturers with markets that once felt unreachable. These aren't side projects, they're lifelines. And they are solving problems Walmart, with all its scale, never cared to touch. Think about the human angle. Most Americans grew up in a world where retail meant driving to a superstore, pushing a heavy cart, and hoping the checkout line wasn't endless. That habit shaped generations. But imagine if you never had to do that in the first place. If your first shopping experience wasn't aisles of sameness, but mobile platforms offering convenience and traceability. That's what millions of young Africans know as normal. And when normal looks like innovation, it attracts attention from outside. Here's the mini hook buried inside. Solutions created for African realities are now seducing global audiences. Kenya's M-Pesa made mobile money mainstream long before Apple Pay was even on the drawing board. Rwanda's drone delivery networks already rival Silicon Valley's prototypes. Nigeria's Paystack impressed Stripe enough to buy it outright. Each of these milestones began as local answers to local challenges and ended up shaping global expectations. Take the story of Aisha, a 22-year-old designer in Accra. She started sewing handbags with scraps her mother used to discard. Instead of waiting for shelf space in a giant American retailer, she listed them on a local app. Within 6 months, a buyer in Paris ordered 10. The purchase wasn't just about fashion, it was about visibility. Aisha went from invisible talent to international supplier without ever stepping into a Walmart. Her story is no anomaly. It's a preview of where consumer power is heading. And here's where the contrast grows sharper. In America, younger shoppers walk into Walmart and see broken machines, long lines, and rows of products that all look the same. In Africa, younger entrepreneurs open an app they built themselves and sell to the world. The emotional difference is staggering. One feels like decay, the other like creation. As these youth-driven models expand, they pull in not just African buyers, but American and European consumers tired of faceless corporations. And slowly, a realization settles in. The future of retail doesn't belong to whoever owns the biggest building. It belongs to whoever earns the deepest trust. That recognition alone is enough to unsettle Walmart's boardrooms. Because when the youngest continent on Earth decides to lead, the rest of the world doesn't get to ignore it. And the ripple effect is already visible. Money flowing out of US malls and into African startups. Loyalty migrating from scale to story, from old to new. Which raises a sharper tension still. What happens when the very empire that once defined consumerism is forced to imitate the very markets it used to dismiss? Here's the irony that cuts deepest. Walmart, once the pioneer others copied, is now the one imitating. In boardrooms across Bentonville, executives are scrambling to mimic ideas already thriving in Africa: digital payments, traceable supply chains, last-mile delivery solutions. But imitation doesn't carry the same weight as innovation. What looks like reinvention on a press release often feels like desperation on the ground. This reversal stings because scale used to be Walmart's ultimate weapon. Bigger stores, wider supply chains, cheaper prices — that formula worked for decades. Yet scale without originality is hollow. Consumers can sense it. When they see Walmart suddenly promoting ethical sourcing after years of ignoring it, the shift doesn't build trust. It highlights the gap between what customers want and what the company can genuinely deliver. Think of human behavior here. Most people, if they can, forgive mistakes when they feel sincerity. But when change looks forced, trust erodes faster. That's why African platforms, though smaller, feel authentic in a way Walmart cannot replicate. They were built from the start to solve real human problems, not retrofit slogans around profit margins. A subtle twist emerges. Walmart isn't just competing with African startups abroad, it's competing with Africa's reputation at home. Younger American shoppers see innovations like M-Pesa or Paystack and realize Africa was doing mobile finance years before Walmart even fixed its checkout glitches. That realization challenges a deeply rooted assumption that the West always leads and the rest follow. Suddenly, the roles look reversed. Consider the story of Daniel, a software engineer in New Jersey. He grew up believing Walmart was efficiency incarnate. But after reading about Rwanda's drone delivery system for medical supplies, he admitted online that he felt embarrassed. "How is it," he wrote, "that a country with fewer resources figured out solutions my own grocery store still struggles with?" His comment struck a chord because it revealed something larger. People are waking up to the idea that innovation isn't tied to wealth, it's tied to will. And this is where the mood intensifies. America's biggest retailer can open more stores in South Africa or Nigeria, but it's no longer arriving as the conquering giant. It arrives as the outsider, racing to catch up in markets that don't need it. The empire that once dictated terms now begs for entry, and that visual alone shifts perception. The deeper shift, though, isn't about Africa outpacing Walmart. It's about how consumers everywhere are starting to see the cracks in the old story of dominance. Because when the leader looks like the follower, confidence migrates. And as confidence moves, so does money, loyalty, and influence. That realization sets the stage for a more unsettling truth. What happens when the cracks in Walmart's image begin to mirror cracks in America's own sense of retail supremacy? For decades, Walmart wasn't just a store. It was America's anchor of consumer power. Its supercenters became symbols of convenience, its expansion into every town a measure of national dominance. But here's the shock. That anchor is slipping, and every dollar drifting out of Walmart's orbit is more than lost revenue. It's a lost signal of respect. The numbers reveal the quiet panic. Analysts now track measurable leakage, not just in sales but in influence. Investors who once treated Walmart stock as untouchable are diversifying into African startups, supply chains, and logistics networks. Consumers who once filled their carts in Arkansas are clicking buy on platforms in Nairobi. It may look like market choice on the surface, but to those watching closely, it resembles something closer to an empire in retreat. The human dimension makes it sharper. Most Americans grew up in a cycle where Walmart's growth equaled community growth. A new supercenter meant jobs, lower prices, and the illusion of stability. But as habits change, that connection frays. According to surveys on consumer sentiment, younger shoppers no longer see Walmart as opportunity, they see it as monotony. And when monotony turns to mistrust, people don't just complain, they pivot. Here's the subtle twist. Africa's rise isn't only pulling shoppers away from Walmart, it's altering how Americans view retail itself. A 20-something in California, for instance, shared on social media that buying African-made clothing online felt like joining something bigger. The point wasn't just the product, it was the identity tied to it. That kind of meaning Walmart cannot replicate with scale alone. And when meaning becomes a purchasing factor, loyalty migrates in ways no billboard can repair. Think about the psychology. If people can choose between faceless sameness and authentic connection, which way do they lean? Most of the time, humans default to whatever feels safer or easier. But once they experience dignity in a transaction, knowing who made it, where it came from, why it matters, they rarely return to the old model. It's not only commerce, it's confidence, and confidence compounds. The broader implication is unsettling. Walmart was once treated as America's proxy in global trade negotiations, its scale proof of U.S. supremacy. Now, as capital and trust flow toward Africa, that equation falters. Each purchase in Lagos or Addis Ababa chips away at the myth that America controls consumption. And as those chips accumulate, what was once unthinkable, that America's retail crown could crack, becomes harder to deny. The mood builds toward a heavier realization. When the empire that defined shopping for half a century begins to look fragile, the tremors don't stay confined to retail. They ripple outward into how nations perceive power, how investors measure stability, and how consumers rewrite loyalty. And from that vantage point, one question becomes impossible to ignore. If Walmart's cracks mirror America's own, what does Africa's accelerating ascent mean for the balance of global influence? The strangest turn in this story is that Africa is no longer framed as a buyer of the world's leftovers. It is becoming the supplier of identity, culture, and value. From Ghanaian chocolate brands sold proudly in European markets, to Ethiopian coffee chains competing with global franchises, to South African fashion labels exporting authenticity instead of imitation, the continent is flipping the script. What was once dismissed as underdeveloped is now seen as premium. And the irony is sharp. Consumers in the West, tired of faceless mass retail, are paying extra for what Africa has always had: craftsmanship, traceability, and story. This isn't charity, it's choice. And choice is the one thing Walmart never imagined it would lose. The momentum builds not only in products but in infrastructure. Ports in Mombasa and Durban now link to inland manufacturing hubs. Mobile payment systems perfected in Kenya are studied by Silicon Valley. Blockchain tools are certifying African exports with transparency. Walmart still struggles to prove. Each layer adds credibility, and credibility is exactly what Walmart is bleeding. Think about human behavior. When people sense meaning in their purchases, they defend those choices. A woman in Chicago recently described buying a handmade necklace from Nigeria. She said it wasn't the price or the shipping time that mattered, it was knowing her money touched real lives. That emotional satisfaction outweighed convenience, and once someone experiences that, the appetite for bulk sameness fades quickly. Here's the quiet twist inside it all. Walmart can open 10 new stores tomorrow, but every store looks like a monument to yesterday. Africa, by contrast, doesn't need monuments. It has momentum, and momentum is contagious. The more investors and consumers pivot toward African systems, the more the old empire looks irrelevant. The emotional current is undeniable. Walmart's fall is not just a corporate stumble. It's a symbol of America's fading retail dominance. Africa's ascent is not simply economic growth. It's cultural redefinition. And when those two forces collide, the world no longer asks if the balance of power will shift. It only asks how fast. And that leaves us at the threshold of a bigger conversation. If retail has always been the heartbeat of economies, what happens when that heartbeat begins to echo louder in Lagos, Nairobi, and Accra than it does in Bentonville, Arkansas? The strangest part of this story is how quickly the roles have reversed. For half a century, Walmart stood as the fortress of American consumerism, dictating price, pace, and perception. Now, that fortress looks more like a relic, while Africa, the place once described in whispers as developing, is shaping the new playbook. That contradiction isn't just economic, it's symbolic. The evidence is everywhere. Analysts measure billions slipping from Walmart's registers into African platforms, but the numbers alone don't capture the full mood. What they miss is the emotional transfer, consumers moving from frustration to discovery, from faceless bulk to authentic connection. It's the difference between buying a product and buying a story. And in today's world, story wins. Here's the twist that unsettles old assumptions. Africa is no longer waiting to be included in the system. It is designing the system itself. Every handcrafted export, every fintech app, every logistics breakthrough sends the same message, that innovation doesn't belong exclusively to the West. For many Americans, this realization feels like déjà vu in reverse. The empire that once set the rules is now scrambling to follow them. Think about human behavior for a moment. Most people, if they can, cling to the familiar. Yet when the familiar stops delivering value, they don't just grumble, they walk away. That's why ordinary families who once built their weekends around Walmart runs are experimenting with new habits that feel more dignified. And when dignity becomes habit, no discount slogan can compete. Consider the story of Marcus, a retired teacher in Florida. He spent years buying groceries at Walmart, chalking up each small disappointment to just the way it is. Then his granddaughter showed him an African platform selling coffee with full traceability. Marcus tried it once, then twice, and before long he admitted he hadn't stepped inside Walmart for weeks. What changed wasn't just coffee, it was trust. And trust is the one currency Walmart can't print. So we arrive here. Walmart's decline isn't merely the fall of a retailer. It's the marker of a global shift, where Africa stands not as a backdrop, but as a driver of new consumer power. The question now isn't whether Africa will rise, it's how fast the rest of the world will notice. And that's where you come in. Do you think Walmart can ever win back trust once it's been broken, or has the world already moved on? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. Don't forget to subscribe to Africa Daily Good News, like this video, and share it with friends so more people can join this conversation. And if you're ready to keep exploring, our next video takes you deeper into Africa's changing role on the global stage. Stay with us. The story is only beginning.